at the university, and this normally happens when you do a doctorate. It always happens when you do a doctorate. Very, very rarely happens for an undergraduate degree. And what had happened is that one of the papers that I'd written in the New Testament, actually about the historical Jesus and his cross, his atoning death, had very much infuriated the marker of my exam. And he'd given me a very low grade. Now, I got a first-class degree overall, but there was this one very low grade. So the external examiner saw this and thought, what's going on here? Investigated it and thought that something unfair had gone on. So the result of all of that was that the day before my wedding, I had to go into Oxford University.
That's a real good preparation.
Yes, into Oxford University and sit in front of 14 of the sort of leading minds of the theology faculty and be grilled on the spot. And the first question, I had to translate some Greek, but then really the first question was this: you don't honestly mean to say that you still believe, after 3 years at this university, that Jesus actually said the words written in the Gospels? Amazing question. To which I said, well, I find it interesting the assumption that you are making, that he didn't say those words written in the Gospel. My assumption that he said those words is based on evidence, because these are historical accounts which are well attested by manuscript tradition.
Absolutely.
And also by the early church in multiple languages and very early manuscripts. On what basis do you assume he didn't say those words? You have no evidence for that. Yeah. You just believe it because you don't want to accept what he said. Yeah. So anyway, that was the beginning. An hour later, you know, we were still there. But I think what struck me was that it wasn't an intellectual problem. It wasn't an issue based on evidence. It was an emotional or, you know, an act of the will desiring this not to be true. In other words, it wasn't an intellectual rejection. And that was even there at Oxford University. So I think that was a really good preparation for me. Now, that doesn't mean that some people don't have intellectual questions. I honestly believe that many people do. But I think what helps us to understand what's going on with people's hearts is if we do answer their question, and then that brings them to a point where they're actually ready to start following Christ, then that reveals that it was an intellectual question.
That's right. Yes.
Or if we can't answer it for some reason and you know, they reject Christ on the basis of that, then hopefully we need to do research, come back and, you know, continue that conversation. Yes. But very often it's the other way. It isn't like that. So the question is answered and, you know, the person still isn't satisfied, even though there is a good answer.
You sort of did something there right in the Oxford University, because it's very much, to me, part of apologetics. You answered a question with a question.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus did this very often.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that helps, doesn't it? Because that person is asking a question, but if you ask them one back, it does make them think of why they're asking and why they assume certain things to happen. Is this something you've developed in your presentations as well?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. One of I work with a guy called Ravi Zacharias, and one of the things that he's very good at in terms of training the church in order for everyone to be able to do this is to train people how to ask questions as well as answer them, and to remember that, you know, Jesus asked 157 questions in the Gospels. Right. It's a lot of questions.
Absolutely.
More than sermons are recorded.
Yes,
you know, it's a huge aspect to his ministry. And I think the use of a question is a powerful thing, especially if we actually listen to what people say
Good point.
when they answer it. So it's something that for us is very important. I think it helps us to learn. It helps us to learn where people are coming from, what their real questions are. I think a question also helps the person to really formulate what they think, to formulate what their objection is, and not just throw tired arguments that they may have read or heard from somewhere else back at you, but really to engage as a person in that process of conversation. So,
I found with because I've worked with the cults and occult and that for a number of years, and people, I found some of the questions people are asking, they don't really know what they're asking, and then unless you ask another question, you don't. I mean, for instance, one of the famous, why doesn't God stop the evil, and that it seems to me, unless we know their definition of God and their definition of evil, we can't actually answer that question. But many Christians just try and jump in, but asking that question really helps us to find exactly where that person is.
Yeah,
doesn't
that's
it?
absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe at this point it'd be good if we could actually define from you. We've gone halfway through the programme.
Really, we're halfway
about
through
apologetics. We haven't even talked about it. I'm fascinated. I mean, I'm quite happy. But how would you define apologetics, and why is apologetics so important for Christians today?
Okay. Well, the word apologetics comes from a Greek word, the word apologia, which appears in 1 Peter 3:15, and the verse says, always be prepared when anyone asks you to give the reason for the hope within, and do it with gentleness and respect. And the word that we have translated in the NIV, answer, is the word there for apologia. Now, apologia meant, in the Greek context, a reasoned defence in a court of law. So the scenario that Peter has in mind when he uses that word, and actually Paul uses it as well of his ministry, is that you're in a court of law, somebody stands accused of a crime, and the defence lawyer gets up and makes a statement in order to defend the person in the dock, and that is an apologia. But the defence lawyer doesn't only do that, he also asks questions of the witness and of the prosecution. So it's not purely a defensive thing, but I guess the idea is that you're giving a reasonable, articulate, thought through defence of the Christian faith, and that you do that with, as Peter says, with gentleness and respect. So that's all apologetics is. That sometimes it sounds like apologising. It isn't that at all.
Yes, right.
It simply means, I think, in today's words, or in today's world, talking to people who are not Christians about your Christian faith in a way that transcends the purely personal. I feel this has happened to me. It's transcending that and saying, this is true for everyone for the following reasons. Right. Does that make sense? So it's making a connection with them. Yes. It does involve the personal. I think personal testimony is important, but it's evangelism which really connects with the questioner and says, this is true, and you know what? You can know that this is true. There's evidence for this. This is the best explanation for reality. And, Jesus coming in history and his cross really does connect with you. It's not some fairy tale. It's not a superstition. It's not something I believe because my grandmother told me to believe it. It's actually true and real. And, you're then entering into a conversation with someone whereby they can say, what do you mean? Tell me more. What's this about? So I think apologetics is really answering the questions that people have about the Christian faith, but more than that, presenting Christ in a conversation in a way that is reasonable to people.
Because so many. Often you hear, and many people say, of course, you can only accept that by faith.
Yeah.
And in the final analysis, obviously there has to be that